On Monday, the 5th of February, we hosted the annual Chaplaincy public lecture at Heriot-Watt University, and we're delighted now to make a recording of that lecture available to you to watch. The lecture this year was delivered by Professor John Wyatt. He's Emeritus Professor of Neonatology, Ethics and Perinatology at UCL London. John became a Christian while he was on his undergraduate studies, and he's been a member of All Souls Church in London now for over 50 years. He's an eminent clinician, doctor, author, research scientist, and he is also a granddad of 4. And now he's exploring what the world that his grandchildren are going to grow up into will look like through some of his particular interests in artificial intelligence and robotics. I hope you enjoy the recording of that evening's lecture.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jane, for that introduction, Vice-Chancellor, and it's a real privilege for me to be here today. And as you've heard, my background is as a baby doctor, caring for some very tiny and fragile little babies in an intensive care unit in London. And some of the babies go right down to 500 grams, literally fitting in the palm of my hand. And it's a very rewarding, challenging, and technically demanding kind of job. This is what the environment can look like. This is actually some clinical research involving a very sick baby taking place at UCL as part of the team that I used to help lead, the perinatal brain research team. And that's actually my hand and one of the babies on the baby unit. So over the years, as I was involved both as a practicing clinician and also as a research scientist, I became increasingly interested in the ethical challenges and dilemmas which happen as technology advances. In fact, it seems every time there's a technological advance, it raises new questions and new challenges. But often it really focuses back on some age-old questions, and in particular, what does it mean to be human? And I'm now retiring from the clinical environment, but I remain fascinated by these questions and the deeper ethical, philosophical, social, religious issues which lie behind them. Now, I know that as a research scientist, an academic, it's easy to develop tunnel vision. But tonight, I'm going to focus on some really big questions. And if you come expecting some nice, slick answers to big questions, you're going to be very disappointed. I haven't got any nice, slick answers. I don't think there are any slick, simple answers. But I hope we can think together on some of these big questions. And in this talk, I'm going to be looking at some of the extraordinary advances and changes which are happening to our humanity. And so we'll be asking that age-old question again: what does advancing technology tell us about what it means to be human? What does it mean to be human in 2024? And what about 2030? And what about 2050? And what about the world that my grandchildren will growing up into? What is their future? We live in extraordinary times when science fiction seems to be turning into science fact in front of our eyes. So, for more than 100 years, science fiction has reflected and speculated about the possibilities of human technological enhancement of humanity. Films looking at issues to do with human enhancement, robots and the possibility that robots are going to rise up and take over the world. This is a film about enhancement, intellectual, cognitive enhancement. The novels of Philip K. Dick, particularly important and influential, raising issues. It was he who came up with this idea of the replicants, which were brilliantly engineered robots that reproduced human characteristics, and leading to the film The Blade Runner based on those novels. Star Trek, notice the date when it was imagined that Commander Data, a completely synthetic robot, would be created. And isn't it interesting that the writers of Star Trek were not predicting this for another 300 years, whereas I think we're a whole lot closer than they might have thought. Ex Machina, a film about humanoid robots, humans, television programs looking at the link between biological humans, and so on. And so this is a very common science fiction trope, particularly the enhanced human being with sophisticated implants. Here's a close-up of the eye with some kind of, this is a science fiction image of the enhanced eye. So there have been 100 years or more that science fiction has reflected and speculated about the possibilities of human technological enhancement. But for the first time in human history, this science fiction is now becoming a realistic possibility. And this is the big idea behind the philosophical and technical movement, which is generally called transhumanism. The idea of using sophisticated technology to change our bodies, to enhance and change our bodies and our functional capacities in fundamental ways. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about transhumanism. This is one of those philosophies whose time has arrived. The technology is at last caught up with the dreams of science fiction writers, novelists, fantasists, and so on. But interestingly, I think, in fact, we're already seeing a lot of what I would call low-tech transhumanism. The idea that we don't have to accept our bodies in the way we receive them. Instead, we can take control and start to change the structure of our bodies. So cosmetic surgery, a massive growth industry of people who say, I just don't like this body anymore. Okay, it's the way I was made. This is the way that nature or the genetic lottery of life or God made me, but I don't like it. I didn't choose this body. And I, the choosing self, says, I'm going to change my body. I'm going to use technology to change my appearance and the structure of my body. And cosmetic surgery is showing a dramatic rise across the world. And incidentally, some of the commonest cosmetic surgery procedures for females are breast enhancement, buttock manipulation, and, would you believe, genital surgery. I'm not going to go into genital surgery. You'll be pleased to know this is a family show. But it seems that thousands and thousands of people, and particularly women, are undergoing invasive and potentially destructive and dangerous surgery in order to transform their bodies from what is a normal female body type into what is basically a male pornographic fantasy, to make a body shape with enormous globular breasts, tiny waist, and prominent buttocks. And this illustrates the problem of choice. These women are freely choosing to change their bodies like this, but are they genuinely free? Are the thousands of women who are choosing to mutilate their bodies like this making genuinely free and autonomous choices? Or are they in some sense being manipulated and coerced by hidden psychological, emotional, and commercial forces? There are other examples of low-tech transhumanism, including drug and genetic doping to increase physical athletic strength, mood and cognition enhancing drugs. So that when it comes to brains, modafinil is a cognitive enhancing therapy. As you can see, it makes you look very bright, very intelligent, and it makes your teeth go very white, I think. But and you're clearly very happy. So this idea of using technology, pharmacology to increase academic performance. The study that Nature magazine took some years found that an astonishing percentage of both academics and students were using modafinil or some other pharmacological agent in order to enhance their cognitive ability. And that illustrates another of the great problems with human enhancement technology. If some members of society start to use technology to improve and enhance their capabilities, then you end up with a competitive arms race where everybody is trying to enhance their bodies, and therefore ultimately no one is staying ahead of the competition. If every student is taking modafinil, then I'm not going to get better grades than I did before. Another possibility for cognitive enhancement is transcranial magnetic stimulation. By subjecting the brain to focused magnetic pulses, there's evidence that performance on various mental tasks can be enhanced for periods of hours, if not longer. And another example of what I call low-tech transhumanism is the rapid growth in research on delaying aging or age reversal and increasing lifespan. It's becoming apparent that in the States in particular, and in particular in tech centers like the Silicon Valley, there are a number of extremely rich, elderly, and frightened men. They are frightened of dying, and they've gone through their life throwing money at whatever their problems are. And now their problem is that they're aging and about to die, and they are throwing obscene amounts of money at this problem. And so many of the tech billionaires are investing massively in age reversal, anti-aging companies. Jeff Bezos here, Google, Calico Labs, Elon Musk, and others. So I think we can see that low-tech transhumanism is already here, this idea that we don't have to accept our bodies, that we can take control, use technology, choose how to change and manipulate our bodies. They're already here. And what's driving human enhancement today is not primarily some kind of quasi-religious longing for a shining new age. I think actually it's a lot more mundane than that. It's a toxic combination of forces we're now seeing in our society. On the one hand, there's consumerism, which says, I want a better body. I want to look different. I want to change. I want better brain. And then there's relativism, ethical, moral relativism, which says, well, what's wrong with it? Why should we stop people if it's their genuine choice? What right do we have in a liberal society to stop people from spending their money where they want to? And then there's technology which says we can make your dreams come true, but it will cost you. And the cost that technology requires is often not just financial, but there are all sorts of other costs, of social costs, psychological costs, emotional costs of undergoing this kind of enhancement. But one of the fascinating things, which I don't think has had enough attention, is the way that science fiction and science fact are interacting. And I think this is genuinely new in the history of humankind, because what's happened previously is that we had a technological advance, like the Industrial Revolution. It happens because of fundamental engineering technological changes. And then what happens is the creative writers, the artists, the dramatists come along, and people like Charles Dickens writes novels about the Industrial Revolution, and William Blake about the Dark Satanic Mills, and so on and so on. But what has happened here is that for more than 100 years, we've had science fiction writers who have preceded the technological change. They've been speculating, fantasizing about what it would be like to have enhanced human beings, what it would be like to have artificial intelligence, and what are all the plot twists, and what are the future. And the interesting thing is that many of the technologists, particularly in Silicon Valley in the States, are complete science fiction nerds. They've been reading this stuff, completely obsessed with science fiction since they were young children. And many of them have said quite consciously they're trying to make it come true. That is, Elon Musk and several of the other tech pioneers have said, we are trying to make the science fiction come true. And there are many examples where the science fiction has influenced the technology. And I haven't time to go through them all, but just one interesting one is a science fiction writer called Ian Banks. Right, it's a series of novels about the culture. They're all set in the distant future when human beings are massively enhanced. And one of the things that he just invented was this idea of what he called neural lace. And this is a fine network of lattice work of electrodes which are inserted underneath the human being's skull and over the surface of the brain, and which then allow them to have this very high bandwidth communication with the most advanced super intelligent computers that are actually running the ships, if you know the culture novels, the spaceships. And lo and behold, so this idea of brain-computer interface is a very standard trope of science fiction, and it's been written about and all the implications and so on. But along comes Elon Musk, and Elon Musk says, to avoid becoming like monkeys, humans must merge with machines. He foresees this massive growth of super intelligent machines and says unless we actually merge with the machines, we will become, he says, like cockroaches, and of the same kind of interest to the computers as a cockroach. And if you see Elon Musk's track record, you would be not very wise to bet against Elon Musk as to whether or not he can make this happen. So far, he's done astonishingly well in making things happen which other people said were completely impossible. So Elon Musk says and creates a company called Neuralink, which is designed to create and invent neural lace as the science fiction concept. And you may have noticed just 5 days ago, I think 5 or 6 days ago, Elon Musk reported their first successful implant into a human being of a wireless chip which will interface with the brain. And this is an example of what's often called dual-use technology. This technology is often used in medicine, in healthcare, so it has obvious implications for people with severe neurological disorders and with conditions which cause paralysis and so on. But at the same time, it can be used for human enhancement. It can be used to take normal, healthy human beings and give them extra abilities. And I think it's only a matter of time before these kind of brain-computer interfaces, some which will just be on the surface of the scalp, like some kind of electrodes on the, but some which will be implanted into the brain itself. I think it's only a matter of time before these become routine, everyday reality. And computer-brain interfaces and human augmentation are a particular goal for advanced military research around the world. So this is the US military research institution, DARPA, who is actively engaged in non-surgical neurotechnology, trying to find ways of linking up military personnel with sensors, with weapons systems, so that they don't need to press buttons, they just think, and they can receive information across the battlefield, they can target weapons and so on. And this is the British government. So actually governments, militaries, advanced militaries across the world are doing this. There seems to have been some classified research breakthroughs which enable the human nervous system to be directly plumbed into military sensors and weapons target selection. And this leads to a nightmarish vision of the cyborg soldier, the technologically enhanced soldier who's able to meld seamlessly with a range of sensors and weapon systems. And across the world, there's a race going on to try to make the smart soldier a reality and to make sure that when it comes to combat soldiers, one of ours is worth 10 of theirs. So just to step back again and think about what's going on here. Traditionally, as people thought about the world, they divided the world into things that were natural and things that were artificial, that were constructed by humans. And the human body was almost like the last bastion of what was natural. We live in a world where technology and science has been changing the environment massively, but until very recently it was the human body and the human mind that was the last bastion of the natural. But now what we see is actually this distinction is increasingly collapsing as that technology is achieving mastery over nature. And the philosopher George Grant pointed out that the very concept of technology is a much more profound and complex thing than we often think. I know for scientists and technologists, you think, well, it's just obvious, it's just making things, what's the big deal? But actually, there is something much more significant about this. And what George Grant pointed out, that in the very word technology, it's made up of two things. Techne, a Greek word which means to make, and logos, which means to know. And he said in that very word we see the interpenetration of making and knowing orientated towards the mastery of nature, both non-human nature and human nature. And we no longer have to therefore accept the givenness of our bodies. We don't have to accept the terrible restrictions and limitations and the frustrations of being human. We can use technology to improve on the original design. Transhumanists argue that to be human is to be subject to claustrophobic limitations and restrictions. But after thousands of years of passivity, where we've just said, we just have to accept it, this is what it means to be human, increasingly, technologists and thinkers are saying, why? Why do we have to accept this? Why can't we take control? Why can't we break out of these claustrophobic limitations? And as one philosopher put it, we should not make a fetish of the particular point of evolution that we've reached. Instead, we can seize hold of the amazing technologies and invent new forms of humanity. So, of course, in its more extreme forms like this, it becomes clear that transhumanism has the features of religious belief. It is a secular form of eschatology, to use a theological word. That's the theology of the last times. It's a future hope which inspires action in the present. It incorporates a potent vision of a new age, even of salvation, a new way of being which is achieved by human ingenuity and technological intervention. So, as we've seen, technology involves mastery. And unfortunately, in this drive for mastery, there are always winners and losers. And sometimes it's other human beings who are the losers. There are human beings, as some people become stronger, other people become weaker, often instrumentalized. It's often the weakest human beings who are instrumentalized and abused by stronger human beings in the quest for mastery over nature. And C.S. Lewis summed this up neatly in his prescient book, The Abolition of Man, which was written shortly after the Second World War. And he wrote these words: "Man's power over nature turns out to be power exerted by some men over other men." Well, the language is rather dated, but you can see the force of the statement. Whenever we hear about humans winning power over nature, we should always think about the power relations and which humans are being abused. And of course, we're seeing this in Silicon Valley with the rise of the small number of obscenely wealthy people who exert enormous power over other people. People like Elon Musk and Sam Altman and the Amazon and Microsoft CEOs. Other more extreme possibilities for human enhancement are first mind uploading, the idea that human personality, human consciousness, human mental activity ultimately represent information. And to use the technical term, information that is computationally tractable, that is computational. And that information, which is currently stored in our physical brain cells, could be uplifted and uploaded into a computer network so that the theory is it's possible to extract all the information that's stored in your brain, everything that represents you and your history and your experience, turn it into ones and noughts, and then place it in the cloud in a massive computer server. And the idea is that information can be instantiated in different physical forms. So much like a pop song, you can hear a pop song live in a concert. It can be recorded as an MP3 file. It can be placed on a vinyl record, or even something very old-fashioned like a CD-ROM, or it can be uploaded into servers in the cloud. And yet, it's still the same song. The information is the same, even though the physical instantiation is very different. And so the idea is that our individual consciousness, our personality and identity can be instantiated in different physical forms. This is what you are really. You're just information. It's a weird kind of modern Platonism. Now, at the moment, this is pure science fiction. There are lots of complex philosophical, technical problems which suggest to me that mind uploading is never going to become a reality. What is much more realistic is that AI algorithms, which are trained on the entire product of my life, every conversation, every email, every social media post, they are able to simulate my conversation and responses, and bizarrely, they can become an artificial intelligence companion. It's a kind of weird narcissism. This program is me, trained entirely on me, but it speaks back to me, and I can have, and what's more, it's incredibly friendly and caring and nice, and always thinks I'm wonderful. It's a distorting mirror in which I stare at my reflection. But it gets weirder, because after I die, the algorithm can continue to function as my simulacrum. You can talk to my algorithm, and I will respond. I'll continue to send emails and texts, except, of course, it isn't really me. It's just a very clever simulation. Now, you may think this is just fantasy, but actually it's already happening, and it's called digital immortality. And this is an article from Wired, and you probably can't see the cartoon, but it's got these people at the grave with the coffin, and they're saying, "So, did you like the flowers?" And then there is the immortal digital who says, "Yes, I love them. They're lovely." The final, this is fascinating. So Westworld is a television series which is set, again, in the near future, in a theme park which is postulated by incredibly sophisticated humanoid robots. And real human beings come to the theme park in order to live out their fantasies with the humanoid robots. And in one of the early episodes, a human being comes for the first time to the theme park, and this beautiful woman comes up to him and asks, is there anything I can help you with? And he stares at her and he says, "Are you one of them or are you real?" And she says, "If you can't tell, does it matter?" And I think that is a very profound question. I think it's a question which is going to haunt us as we go into the future. If you can't tell the difference between an incredibly sophisticated simulacrum, something which a simulation, something that represents a caring, compassionate, intelligent, loving human being, if you can't tell the difference, does it matter? And there are a lot of people out there who are going to say, no, it doesn't matter. In the end, it's the experience. If it feels right, if it feels like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck. What's your problem? And yet I think many of us, including myself, will say, but it's not real. It's not authentic. It's a simulation. Just one last crazy idea, not so crazy idea, and that's moral enhancement. This is another science fiction idea whose time has come, because the great fear of human enhancement is what's going to happen if we give human beings more and more power and more capabilities. There are bound to be malevolent, evil people out there who are going to use these enhanced powers for great harm and destroy and damage other people. What happens if we enhance Hitler? So therefore, it has been seriously proposed we're going to learn to have ways for technological moral enhancement. And there's already evidence, for instance, that if you spray the hormone oxytocin into a room in which people are interacting, you can show that they become more pro-social. They become less aggressive, they're more cooperative. So it's therefore perfectly possible to think of more potent endocrine and pharmacological agents that will modulate human behavior to make us become more compliant, more cooperative, less violent, and maybe more obedient to authority. In the past, philosophers, theologians, educators promoted the idea of spiritual and moral formation over a process of years with the ultimate aim of improving human behavior. Now the idea is we can use technology as a quick fix. We can solve the problem. And there's an interesting twist here because it's been argued that if safe and effective technological moral enhancement ever becomes a reality, then it must be made compulsory across the whole population. Because what happens if all the good people agree to have their morality improved while all the really bad people refuse? So the only way to get over this problem is to make enhancement compulsory. It's going to have to be like the fluoride in the water. Everybody in the community is going to be morally enhanced, whether we want it or not. So let's stand back a bit from the details and try to look at the big picture. And one of the questions is, where is this all going? What is the ultimate goal? What is the telos? What are we aiming to achieve? What is the end game? It's a question we don't ask enough. There's a kind of technological determinism. This just is going to happen. There's nothing we can do to change its direction. But what is the goal? What is the ultimate aim? And techno-optimism creates a kind of wonderful, glowing vision of the future where technology is going to surround us. And this is going to be the technologically enhanced city. Notice it's always got very blue sky. It's always very sunny in technologically enhanced cities. But whatever you want, whatever your dream and desire, instantaneously and without effort, the future will become, your dreams will be fulfilled. Life becomes frictionless. Every desire, every longing, every interest will be satisfied instantly and effortlessly in the new digital world. Frustration, struggle, boredom will be banished. Instead, we'll be free to fulfill our wildest dreams with the minimum of effort. But is this a future in which physically embodied human beings can flourish and find their ultimate purpose and meaning? I know that this is the vision of Heriot-Watt, as the Vice-Chancellor said, to create technology in a human-centered way to help human flourishing, and I really applaud that. But it's quite a challenge to know how, if we have, is a frictionless future one in which we're going to flourish? This is an image from the Disney film DALL-E, portrayed a world in which humans have destroyed the planet and have all migrated to massive space liners where we're served by intelligent robots and able to lead lives of indolence and ease. And here's an image from that film. It's a humorous but terrifying portrait of what might happen to humans in a frictionless future. So how can we use technology to create a future? And one of the strange things about human beings is, in order for us, as we have been created, to develop and flourish, it seems that we need resistance, friction, struggle, perseverance, frustration, pain. Just think how a child, we've got grandchildren and we're watching them learn to walk and learn to just get around the place. And you see the number of times they have to fall over and reach out and struggle and try again. And that's how human development works. It needs friction, resistance, frustration, and even pain. And what about the moral values which underpin transhumanism and this enhancement technology? Well, it comes with a very liberal perspective. Everybody should be completely free to choose. the freedom from coercion and violence, peaceful coexistence, individual choice, individual autonomy, okay, with the possible exception of moral enhancement, you should be completely free to choose what you want, what kind of enhancements you choose. We are nice people, we are liberals. And individual choice is at the heart of liberalism. We've already seen some of the problems of free choice when we looked at cosmetic surgery, but you know there's a deeper philosophical problem as well. Yes, I should be free to choose, but hang on a minute, who is the I, the self, who is doing the choosing about my body? Isn't myself merely a product of my body? Isn't it a product of my brain? And so liberalism says freedom and personal choice are at the heart of a good life and a good society, but contemporary neuroscience, the orthodoxy, says there is no such thing as an internal self making choices. Our sense of being a choosing self is merely an illusion created by our brains. And the theory is it had a survival advantage on the African savannah to create this illusion that we were able to choose. But in reality, there's just neural mechanisms churning away, responding to stimuli, processing information, generating outputs. So the idea that there is an I choosing what to do with my body collapses into incoherence. Genuine choice is an illusion. So they can't both be true. One of them has to collapse. And I will lay money that as we go into the next decades, it is our understanding of choice that is going to change. And maybe it will collapse. Neuroscience will win. Physicalism will win. Choice is a useful illusion to keep the punters happy. But ultimately, there are mechanisms and there's powerful technology. And there's nothing you can do about it. Those of you who are older may remember some years ago there was a campaign led by Richard Dawkins to promote what was then called the New Atheism. Now it's rather old, tired atheism, but never mind. And Dawkins and the campaigners paid a lot of money for London buses to carry posters which said, "There is probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy yourself." The Advertising Standards Authority said they couldn't say there is no God, because it might not be accurate. Well, I like this clever twist, which says, there's probably no free will. Now stop worrying as though you had a choice. So stepping back some more, what do these amazing technical advances tell us about the age-old question? What does it mean to be human? And at root, we've got two competing ways of looking at our humanity. One possibility is that we are just a product of random and meaningless forces of chance and necessity. And we've all seen images like this. We are biological mechanisms, fiercely complex, but mechanisms nonetheless. We've evolved from the African savannah to evade predators. We are brains evolved. And those neural circuits, again, by chance, enable us to develop consciousness and language and art, and we can investigate the fundamental structures of the universe. And these same neural circuits allow us to develop technology and change our bodies and brains. And that fantastic story from the Big Bang all the way to here, well, it's all ultimately meaningless. It's not a story at all. It's just a pointless, gigantic fluke. But for some bizarre reason, Homo sapiens long for meaning. And so we invent a meaning for our lives. And we pretend that our lives have significance. And we pretend that our experiences of love and beauty and science and knowledge and wisdom, that they're all valuable, that we can create meaning. But deep down, if we dare to reflect, many of us don't quite believe the inventor's stories we tell ourselves. But here's a strange thing. If we are merely evolved beings adapted to our environment, passing on our genes to the next generation, why is there such a sense of dissatisfaction with the human condition? Why is the human race continually haunted by longing for a better kind of humanity, for stronger bodies, greater knowledge, freedom to explore, even glory? Where do these strange feelings come from? Okay, well, perhaps there is some extrinsic meaning to the cosmos and to Homo sapiens. Perhaps the history of our life on this planet is not just a meaningless set of coincidences. Maybe there is an underlying grand narrative. Maybe it's all about intelligence. We're all familiar with this, with the left-hand side of this diagram, but now there are people increasingly saying, hang on a minute, maybe we are not the end point of evolution. Maybe it's all about intelligence, and maybe we're merely a stage in the onward rush of increasing intelligence. What if we were always destined to create machines which would eventually lead to our extinction? Some people have suggested that humans are a kind of biological boot code, a simple computer program which runs first when you restart a computer and which then loads the main operating system. Maybe we're a biological boot code to get the real operating system of the universe started. The machines and the AI that we're creating are the real deal, and they're going to take over and lead to our extinction. Well, I don't know about you, but I think this new narrative of the universe becoming intelligent is still fairly bleak as far as Homo sapiens go. So here's a third possibility, and here we're coming to the contribution of a faith position, and in particular the Christian faith. Christianity, together with the other Abrahamic faiths of Islam and Judaism, claim that human beings are not self-explanatory. We can never discover the meaning of our existence by analyzing our DNA code or our physical structures of our brains. We derive our meaning from outside ourselves, from the Creator God in whose image we are made. We're not autonomous individuals creating ourselves. No, we're images. We're reflections of another reality. We're not self-explanatory. We are derivative. We derive our meaning from outside ourselves. And here's a kind of analogy. Suppose that at this very moment, some super intelligent alien being on the galaxy Zog is receiving through space this strange, distorted image. And you can imagine the super intelligent beings analyzing this image with the utmost detail, the precise relationship between all the pixels, the relationship between the different colors, the topography of the image, and so on. They will never understand what they're looking at unless they understand that it's a map. It's the London Underground map. And in other words, those precise lines, this abstract diagram of colors and pixels and lines, reflects a completely different reality. It reflects these tubular metal structures which go trundling around a particular part of the planet. And so in other words, these two things, which appear to be so utterly different, an abstract diagram of lines and these bizarre metal things, actually have a hidden connection. One is a map of the other. Now that's just an analogy, but I suggest that's a picture of what Christianity claims, that God chose to take a humble carbon-based life form and use it to map onto his being, that human beings are reflections of the divine. And you'll never understand what it means to be a human being unless you understand, above all, that we're a map, that we map onto the mysterious reflection of God himself. And incidentally, this is why human beings, our dignity and our significance comes not from our cognitive abilities or from our sporting abilities, but from our godlikeness. So humans in God's image are a person made for relationship. We're locked in relation with the natural world, with other humans, and with the divine, and we're genuinely free to have the dignity of choice, creativity, and accountability, and we're encoded with longings. We shouldn't be surprised that Homo sapiens has these strange, mysterious longings for something better, dreams of a better world and a better humanity. They're encoded in our humanity. And the Christian faith points to the dignity and value of the original model, Mark I humanity. This is reinforced by the claim that the invisible creator God, the mind who framed the entire cosmos, reveals himself in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, an old-fashioned original model human being. And this has implications for how we think about enhancement technology. Although technology offers us amazing possibilities for enhanced bodies, senses, and brains, there is an irreducible and irreplaceable dignity in the original model, humanity. Just as there used to be a campaign for real ale, Perhaps in the future we will have campaigns for real humanity, real relationships, real in-person, face-to-face friendships, real community. There's a lot more could be said about this. I'm running out of time. But before I finish, I want to come on to an even more outlandish claim that Christianity makes. And this comes from the idea that we're all part of a grand narrative, a narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we find ourselves as bit players in the middle of this grand narrative. And nothing about our existence will ultimately make sense until we come to accept this extraordinary and almost unbelievable truth. The cosmos is a drama, a narrative, and we are all part of it. And the drama starts before the Big Bang, and it will go on beyond the heat death of the universe. It's interesting that the meaning of any particular narrative is often only apparent at the end. Think of a spy novel or a detective whodunit. It's only with the final plot twist in those last few pages that you suddenly realize, oh, that's what was going on. That's why she was behaving like this. The meaning is revealed in the end. And Christianity claims that it's just the same with the grand narrative of the cosmos. It's the ending, the final chapter, which reveals the meaning of the entire drama. And the ending of the narrative is fairly extraordinary because it seems that humans were always intended to undergo radical enhancement. We're intended to be upgraded, transformed, glorified. And if you don't believe me, here are some snippets from the New Testament. Transformation of every aspect of humanity, including the physical human body. Transformation of human knowledge, awareness, and consciousness. The ultimate defeat of death, pain, and suffering. Transformation of society and relationships. And a cosmic scale of the new heaven and the new earth. The Apostle Paul uses the analogy of a seed and the future flower. Our current bodies are like seeds. But just as for a seed, our bodies encode something far more wonderful. Locked inside our pathetic bodies is all the information which will go to create the glorious being that we are destined to become. And actually that's a sunflower seed. So locked inside that seed is all the information that's going to make the sunflower. And the Apostle Paul says, and that's what your body is like. Your body is a seed. The Christian faith claims that our human future is going to be far more wonderful than the most outlandish speculation of science fiction writers. And what I want to argue is that this is the ultimate source of the attraction of transhumanism. This is why we are haunted by desires which we can hardly express. Our universal human longings for something better, for something far more wonderful. And Christianity says that's not a fantasy. It's future reality. God has encoded into our hearts an awareness and a deep longing for a future reality. He has put eternity into man's hearts, as the writer to Ecclesiastes said. But the route to the future may not be through technological enhancements, although they may have their place. Ultimately, the route to our future enhancement is through death and resurrection. Because it was Jesus of Nazareth who said, unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. So to close, we live in an extraordinary time when science fiction is coming true in our midst. In order to navigate our way through the mind-boggling possibilities and risks of technology, we need to reflect more deeply on what it means to be a human being and what kind of world we wish to build for the future. How can we retain our essential humanity? Are human beings product of random and meaningless biological and mechanistic processes? Or is there something more significant? If it's true that human beings encode meaning within themselves, if it's true that we reflect a greater reality, then we can find a philosophical foundation on which we can ground authentic human dignity, the unique meaning and value of every human life. And if it's true that human beings find ourselves within a greater narrative, then we have a way of framing a human future that will preserve our human values and which will enable original model human beings to flourish as we look forward to the final radical and unimaginable human enhancement that lies beyond the grave. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you for being willing to take some questions as well this evening. We do have just a short time for that, so if you do have a burning question, maybe just put your hand up and we'll bring a microphone to you. And if you could try and just keep the questions short, then we'll get a few more in. Hayford, just up this side. Okay.
Excuse me.
Thank you for that. That was really, really interesting. And I've got so many questions, but I'll behave and ask one. So recently, I've been looking at this from a PhD. In conjunction, I read Ernest Becker's Denial of Death. And it talks about the Human Immortality Project, how in history it would have been religion and the ideas you've said, you pass on, you go on to the next life. And interestingly, a lot of transhumanism, the ultimate goal is to become post-human. So it's something that is no longer human. And then that goes in with Nietzsche, who wrote a lot about the death of God. And the concern was that then you replace God with technology and you lose what it is to be human, and then that's nihilism. So I was just wondering, for you, obviously being interested in this, how does this match with your faith? Because it seems like what transhuman is, I find it difficult to get it to link with someone with a religious faith, because it seems to quite heavily counteract a lot of the foundational faiths.
Thanks. Well, the truth is that this is such a new, religious faith, the Christian faith is over 2,000 years old, and Christian thinking often evolves slowly over decades, centuries, same with other faiths. And suddenly we're confronted with this runaway technological changes and with all this science fiction coming true. And I think the answer is that most of us feel very wrong-footed, almost taken by surprise. I think there's a huge problem because so many faith leaders have very little scientific background, knowledge, even interest. They never read science fiction, they're not interested in all this stuff. And so it's extremely difficult, I think, for faith leaders to really understand what is going on. There is a Christian transhumanist association, believe it or not, and one of the fascinating things is that there's greater interest in views which was previously often thought to be heretical, that God was involved in the process of evolution, and that there was that the evolutionary changes was into the was part of God's plan. So I think there is absolutely no consensus at the moment, but I do think the interesting thing is, to me, as what I would think of as a fairly orthodox, historic Christian, believing the same kind of Christian faith as the church fathers, is that many people in our society have a deep intuition that this direction that I've been talking about, it cannot be right. It cannot be the ultimate direction for our children to live in this world. Is this a world we would want our children to live in? So they have a deep sense of unease. But if you ask them to give a coherent, logical, philosophically robust reason for why, they couldn't give you. It's very difficult to create a coherent, robust reason why. But Orthodox Christianity does, it seems to me, give an astonishingly relevant critique, because Orthodox Christianity takes the body, the physical body, very seriously, the embodiment. That's the whole point about the incarnation, the doctrine of the incarnation and the doctrine of the resurrection, the physical resurrection, is that it's an embodied faith. And so this is a kind of, as I mentioned, a weird kind of Platonism, a kind of, or nihilism, as you say, and so I am actually quite optimistic, because I think that as we think more deeply about what's going on and how it might relate to historic faith positions, we will discover actually new relevance of a historic orthodox understanding that actually it seems remarkably to engage with the issues that people are asking.
Thank you. Over this.
Could I ask perhaps a slightly more straightforward question? If you take these chimpanzees and start to operate on it in the way you suggested, using technology, would you ever develop one so that they will become a recognizable human being?
So the question was, if you were to take a chimpanzee and use the same kind of enhancement technology, could you turn a chimpanzee into a human being? And I think the answer is no, although people have tried. I'm glad to say that research on primates is pretty strongly restricted in the West, and you've got to have a pretty strong reason for wanting to do a medical reason or scientific reason. But I think that although the differences between chimpanzees and human beings seem at one level to be quite minor, they are also huge in their implications. And therefore, I think it's science fiction again. I don't think it's possible to create human beings in the laboratory. But I think there is something precious and unique about human beings. And actually, one of the things, I didn't have time to mention this, but one of the things I noticed in the kind of transhumanist literature, and often in a lot of popular science, is a kind of disgust about the human body. You know, isn't it pathetic? You know, our brains are useless. We're constantly having delusions. We don't really have a proper understanding of reality. We forget things. Our senses are distorting. Our muscles, our age, everything's useless. And then you say, well, hang on a minute. How do you know it's useless? Oh, well, the neuroscientists have got a very good understanding. Well, hang on a minute. Doesn't a neuroscientist have a human brain? You know, so it seems neuroscientists are very, very scornful about everyone else's brains. When it comes to their own, it's amazingly how sophisticated their understanding is. You know, so it doesn't quite work. But I do think that note of sort of almost self-loathing, a kind of disgust about the human body, is it again a sort of, there's a religious overtone there. And I think that the historic faiths point to the dignity and the significance of original model humanity.
Okay, so we have three more questions, and I'll take those three if you keep your questions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I'm thinking that the way your account of liberalism depended on 19th century theories rather than 18th century theories, in which there was much more awareness of the obligations that we owe to each other to construct society. So I suppose inevitably in Scotland, I'm going back to the Enlightenment. And I'm particularly thinking about Adam Smith referring to himself as being a bow in nothing except my books. And that, I think, perhaps is something which I didn't... The accounts you were giving was entirely egoistic, that we are our memories, but never that we are part of a network. Where does that come in transhumanism?
Thanks very much. It's a very good point. But I think that the liberalism which the transhumanist community adopts is very much the modern version of liberalism, which has become profoundly individualistic. And it's my choices, my body. I do what I like, and you have no right to tell me what I can and can't do with my body. So it is profoundly individualistic, and I think you're right. It has there are different strands of liberalism, but the transhumanist community, by and large, much like the cosmetic surgery, the low-tech transhumanism, this is so much about me and my body and my choices. And so I think this is a very strong individualistic strain within modern liberalism.
And then here, Hayford.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a really interesting talk. I had more questions I wanted to ask you, but I'll try and keep it short to just one. You touched on the predominantly agnostic belief that we don't have very much free will. We're kind of driven by chemicals and our biological impulses and evolution. There's similar narratives in things like physics with like many worlds theory and stuff, that there's also no free will in that context. Do you think there's parallels between narratives like that and conversely, the mostly Christian or religious narrative that we're all part of a big plan and we've got roles and things and it's kind of set out in advance?
Thanks. Gosh, that's a really interesting question. Obviously, superficially, it may sound as though the big narrative that I painted of the Christian narrative, in which we're all bit players, it may sound very deterministic. It may sound as though we are simply programmed living out our little parts. But actually, to me, the whole point of the Christian narrative is that it celebrates genuine freedom. And along with genuine freedom becomes accountability and responsibility. Because, of course, if there's no freedom, there's no responsibility. I'm just doing what my brain cells fired. But if there is genuine freedom, there is genuine responsibility. And the Christian faith argues that this is part of our image, because we are image bearers of the divine, we are genuinely free, and therefore we are accountable. And therefore, I think that is a huge difference between the kind of determinism which modern physicalism and modern neuroscience tends increasingly to go towards.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. There's a lot to unpack. One aspect you didn't touch on, and one of your colleagues from UCL was up before Christmas, can't remember his name, a professor of law, and the legal aspect of all this, which again is a huge question. I think you touched on Martina Rothbate's work of transhumanism, and I find that quite scary when you see the model he has, or she has, sorry, of her wife, whose all thoughts and, as I think, what did you call it, been uploaded to the cloud. And I think there's two things. One, maybe people are now frightened of dying, and I still think they don't understand what consciousness is, and I wondered what your thoughts are on those and how one has risen and one has fallen. You know, the religious belief of life after death, and then this fear of dying and this lack of understanding what consciousness is.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, again, huge issues. I can only just very briefly comment. I do think the fear of death is a very, very real phenomenon, and it leads paradoxically in different ways. It's also a lot of what is leading towards the clamour for euthanasia, for legalized medical killing. It's also, a lot of it is driven by fear, and fear of death and fear of the process of dying. So it's paradoxical that it can lead either towards suicide and medical killing, or it can lead towards life extension and this desperate attempt to use technology. In both cases, they're a kind of technological quick fix for what is a much deeper existential phenomenon. And those quick fixes are always going to fail, I think, and we need to address these fundamental issues. In terms of consciousness, I am convinced that consciousness is profoundly important, precisely because it's not to do with, isn't it wonderful to experience the redness of red? And, you know, as often philosophers talk about the qualia and all that kind of thing. Actually, why is consciousness central? Answer, because of its relations. It is our ability to relate to one another, which is only possible when we're conscious. You can't relate to somebody who's comatose, who's in a coma, or even fast asleep. It's consciousness which allows relation, and ultimately I think it's consciousness which allows relation to God. And so consciousness is a central part, the mystery of consciousness is a central part, it seems to me, of what it means to be human. And but here is a deep, deep problem, and that is before long we're going to have sophisticated AI systems that claim to be conscious, that have all the attributes of a conscious agent. And then we're in trouble because there is no test for consciousness. It's what they call the problem of other minds. How do I know what it feels like to be an AI system? How can I possibly know? And when this thing says, ouch, you're hurting me, and please don't switch me off, how are we going to respond? Some people are suggesting we're going to have committees of the great and the good who are going to investigate particular programs, and if they decide that they're conscious, they're going to grant them status, legal rights. They have to be protected. They have to be, we're not allowed to overwork them. We're not allowed to switch them off. We've got to give them plenty of time for recreation because there are machine rights. And who are we to say that they don't feel pain? So this way, confusion lies. But I think these are kind of issues we're going to have to face.
Thank you so much for questions and answers, John. I'd like to invite, actually, Richard Clotton is our Global Director of, so far, Human Resources. And Richard is going to offer a word of thanks on behalf of the university to you.
Thank you, Jane. Gosh, it's bright. When I decided to attend the annual chaplaincy lecture, instead of attending my regular university orchestra rehearsal, I thought I'd made a very conscious choice. I'm now perhaps less sure that I did. But I am absolutely sure that however that choice was made, it was the right one. Thank you, John, for helping us to reflect on what it means to be human and what it might mean in the future. As an HR professional, human resources professional, I wonder whether my staff development team might evolve into a transhumanism function. You've highlighted how technology might continue to enhance and change our understanding of our humanity, and importantly, the part that faith has to play to this. At Heriot-Watt, we challenge our students to think about their individual purpose, to see their education as a key factor in defining their purpose and to have an impact on the world. Your lecture, I am sure, has helped us all to reflect on our place in the world and the role that both faith and evolving technology plays. Through our research, including that into robotics and AI, we are seeking to enhance and improve the world that we live in for current and future generations. I suspect you have made us all both excited and indeed a little fearful. What future are we creating? I trust that our students and colleagues are not seeking to create a technology that could lead to our extinction, even if we have a digital immortality. But by encouraging reflection on what it means to be human and creating an environment where faith can be openly discussed, our university community can play an important role in defining our future world. It's clear from the number and the range of questions how much we have all enjoyed this evening. Thank you, John, for both inspiring and entertaining us, but most of all for making us reflect on our individual and collective humanity and the choices that we might make to shape this for the better. We will join your campaign for real humanity. Please do join me in the usual way to express our heartfelt appreciation to Professor John Wyatt.